you just want to see him play Texas. You don't see him lose to Texas. You just don't want to say it. You want to see it.
I said play Texas.
Okay.
I don't care.
Wait, what is it? Is it this?
Horns down.
Yeah, that's okay. So we're going to get to the Rubicon today, which is really this pivotal moment, and it'll be very, very exciting. I hope that all of the build-up over the last 13 weeks has been worth it. The Republic ends this week, I think we can say. Gwyn thinks that the Republic was already gone. He makes this comment about Caesar being assassinated, and he says, well, it doesn't really matter at that point because the Republic was dead. But I don't think he says when he thinks the Republic fell. For me, I don't think Caesar's death is necessarily the end of the Republic. I think there was potentially the ability to crawl back, which is why in week 15 we keep going. We don't end this class with Caesar's death. I think there's still a little bit of juice left in the Republic, and we'll talk about why that is when we get to it. If you also want to talk about things having to do with assignments or plans for next term, I always have a few students ask about the Empire course. You're welcome to visit me in my office hour. I'll be here on Wednesday in the morning. We can talk at another time too. Just let me know, and I'll make time. We'll make sure that we can get together, and you can always email me 5 letters, cpe@iu, and then the .edu, so you can get a hold of me.
Is that supposed to say PM?
What's that?
10:30 to 11:30 p.m.
Oh, yeah, coming out with me late at night. No, that would not be a good idea. We'll get a few drinks. We'll go to Kilroy's, and it'll be good. Do not. Yeah, not since not when I was out. Yeah, thank you. 10 a.m. Yeah, in the normal working time.
For extra credit, can we play the Bismarck with you at Nick's English Hut?
Yeah, that'd be great. Yes,
For extra credit.
absolutely. That's worth 5 points for sure. This week, so we're going to get to the immediate circumstances that led to the Civil War. So it's been lots of foreplay, and now we're going to get to the actual thing. It's actually going to happen. And then we're going to talk about Pompey's strategy. I want to talk about Pompey's strategy because, again, you're getting my view. You're getting my view of what's happening. But to me, that's the thing that actually causes real problems. This is like the pivotal thing. It's not so much what Julius Caesar did, but I think it's more what Pompey did. I think Pompey snatches defeat from the jaws of victory. I think he could have easily won this war. And Caesar was far more desperate than kind of revisionist history would suggest. I think Caesar was actually not in the best shape. And Pompey just bungled this thing. And we'll talk about why he does that, both from like kind of a psychological warfare propaganda perspective and then just kind of strategically what went wrong. And then Julius Caesar then gets to be in charge, and he bungles it. Like, he does not seem to be able to get out of his own way and ends up getting himself killed. And we'll talk about why that was. And then I'm hoping that we can get to all this today. We'll see. I may be optimistic. But if we can get to it, then on Wednesday we will talk about, which we should, why doesn't a constitution spontaneously emerge after the death of Julius Caesar? The people that killed him believed, it seems very sincere, they thought that with Caesar dead, everybody would just hold a parade for them. They could go out and give some speeches about how great the Republic is, and that everything would just go back to normal. And that's not what was going to happen, because so many precedents had been broken. And as you know from a lot of the work that we did in the first few weeks, that the censorship was a mess, the consulship was a mess, the tribunate was a mess, what Sulla had done created problems, and then what Caesar does will create problems. And you can't just pretend that all of that didn't happen. And so we'll talk about why a working Republican constitution doesn't really emerge. And then I want to talk about what does emerge, which is a kind of new legacy, a kind of hydra. Caesar gets killed by these Republicans, and then what emerges is a kind of three-headed monster of Caesar's old allies and army buddies and one of his distant relatives also. So we'll talk about how that kind of power structure came to be. And to me, that's where we start to get into kind of end of the Republic territory, is with this triumvirate, this second triumvirate of men that emerge after Julius Caesar dies, and the kinds of things that they do. I think, if I can remember to where we left off, I was trying to remember where we left off, but I think we were talking about what Caesar was doing in Gaul, what Caesar was doing in Rome while he was physically in Gaul. So Caesar is not in Rome for 10 years. He can't go to Rome, or he loses his command. So he's spending 10 years away from Rome, and this has got to be one of the most effective political campaigns to occur when a person is not physically present where one is campaigning. It's more impressive than campaigning in 2020 from your basement. This is Julius Caesar, not even in Italy, and yet he is somehow able to win the hearts and minds of people. Now, one of the things I talked about last time was just the propaganda of advertising, and Laura mentioned how he would even have heralds carrying out these little news clips and headlines from what he was doing in Gaul. Julius Caesar invaded Great Britain. Wow, Julius Caesar conquered this tribe. Julius Caesar surrounded the enemy and he destroyed them. Julius Caesar killed tens of thousands of Gauls. Like, he's spreading all of this in the city. That's obviously part of his strategy. The other thing, which I didn't really get a chance to say much about, is just the political corruption and bribery and just loaning of money that he does while he is away through various agents. So one of the things that he does while he's in Rome is he gets even people that would be associated with Pompey, people that are in the Senate. So these are elite Romans. These are not underlings. These are the elite of the elite. He is able to get them into his pocket by means of making loans with low interest, or in some cases just basically giving that money away for no interest. Now, where is he getting the money? He's getting it from Gaul. And while he is fighting these wars, capturing loot, capturing slaves and selling them, he's using the proceeds of that war to buy political influence back in Rome, even with some of the people who might become his enemies. He is able to generously loan them money so that they can make investments and then obviously profit, and they of course then owe Julius Caesar in return. But in addition to senators and Pompey's associates, he also gets under his influence wealthy freedmen and even slaves. He was the only recourse for many people who were accused of various crimes, people who were in debt. This is also just another way of saying people who were in debt through overspending. So there were people who had kind of started to hope, hey, if we get a really, really rich guy in charge of the government, like Julius Caesar, who's obviously rich because he's giving away so much money, he might cancel debts. He might make it so that all of the debts that we owe will go away. And all of the crimes that we've committed, which we are concerned about, obviously facing justice for, that those might go away if Julius Caesar is in charge. In fact, we're told by the biographer, this is Suetonius. Suetonius writes later during the imperial period, but I think I've mentioned this to you before. He's a great source because he is a secretary who had access to a lot of the minutes of the Senate and other official documents. Like, he wasn't just... There are a lot of Roman writers who just kind of make stuff up and they're relying on rumor. And Suetonius does that. He does rely on rumor. Everybody likes a bit of juicy gossip, right, in their accounts. No Roman could ignore that. But he also does have some hard evidence. And so he knows that Julius Caesar was also really not just a passive... Civil war did not just come upon Julius Caesar. He openly let it be known that if there were to be a war, and if he were to win it, that some of these people that were in debt, that were under investigation, that had various cause for concern in the existing regime, would find themselves in a better situation if he were to emerge victorious in a civil war. So Julius Caesar knows what he's doing. We don't want to portray him as just a passive recipient of a war that was kind of placed upon him. Something is also interesting when it comes to Caesar and Pompey's relationship, and that is when we read Caesar himself, and you had some reading, and I have some topic questions from that reading, from Julius Caesar. This is Julius Caesar's Civil Wars. He didn't get to finish it because he died, but we have the opening pieces of this history that Julius Caesar wrote about the civil war that he himself fought. He writes it in the third person, just like he does the Gallic War, so it kind of sounds a bit more objective. You also might have noticed as you read it that it's often in the present tense, like he just writes things kind of as they happen. It's action, like he's an entertainer. He's writing in a way which is meant to kind of grip the audience and have them interested in what he's writing. He's not just reporting on the facts. He's trying to tell a story. Maybe he was a bit of an entertainer. I don't know, but that's the way that he writes. He kind of has this urgency to the way that he writes, and so he just talks about like nakedly what he thought, and it gives us good insight into this guy that ends up taking over the Roman Republic. It tells us what he was thinking. So he says, Pompey, urged on by Caesar's enemies and by his desire that no one should be on the same level of dignity with himself. For Julius Caesar, he thinks that Pompey is in a pissing contest with him. And that's the way that he sees this. And the Roman Republic, the map of the Roman Empire, is just a giant canvas onto which these two men are just kind of fighting for prestige. It just kind of gives you insight. Now, whether that's true of Pompey, we don't know, but it seems to be true of Caesar. Caesar really does care a lot about prestige, and we see it in some small petty ways, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So he thinks that he's in a contest with Pompey for like status, like for appearances almost. And so Pompey had completely withdrawn himself from Caesar's friendship. This is what Caesar thinks is one of the main causes of the Civil War, is that Pompey had been in this friendship. And we talked about the importance of that. We even had the little tokens, the little handshake tokens that these Romans would give to each other when they were in a political alliance of equals. So you have, obviously, patron-client relationships where there's a kind of an unequal relationship. But then there are also these amicitia, a political friendship, right, between two equals. That's what Caesar thinks that he has with Pompey, and to him, Pompey is reneging on that by entertaining a lot of motions against Caesar in the Senate, by associating with Julius Caesar's enemies. There are a variety of other reasons why Julius Caesar says that Pompey is basically switching sides, and this is something that he really shouldn't do. Now, technically, as we talked about, a Roman could, at any time, dissolve unilaterally on one's own, could dissolve a political alliance or a patron-client relationship. Even a client could disassociate from a patron. That's totally allowed. You can do that. But for Caesar, it's very personal. He clearly is, this is something that hurts him. This is something that he thinks does him some kind of damage. And so the other thing is that they had this connection through the marriage of Julius Caesar's daughter to Pompey. And then I mentioned this last time, when she dies in childbirth, giving birth to Pompey's and her first child, Pompey decides to remarry, but to the daughter of one of Caesar's enemies. So again, all of these are personal slights that Caesar perceives as damaging to him, to his status and to his pride. Stirred too by the discredit, right? Again, see, reputation. These are terms of reputation. The discredit. Attaching to his diversion of 2 legions from their route by Asia and Syria, and his appropriation of them for his own power of supremacy. This is in reference to, I don't know if you remember when this is obviously it's a couple weeks ago. Crassus was over who was the governor of Syria, and he was going to go fight the Parthians. And in order to help him, Julius Caesar and Pompey were each commanded by the Senate to give up 2 legions each to give to Crassus. And Caesar gives up his legions, and Pompey gives up his legions, but Caesar's legions don't end up going out to Crassus. They end up staying, as he says, in Italy. So they don't go to Asia and Syria. Instead, they go to Pompey, and then they are used by the Senate to defend Italy against a possible incursion from Julius Caesar. So these are all little slights that Julius Caesar associates with Pompey. That for Julius Caesar, these are little ways in which they don't, that the relationship is being dissolved. And it's, again, I'm not trying to like over familiarize it, but just think about it. Julius Caesar is off in Gaul. The two guys aren't talking. I mean, who knows what would have happened if they could have just got together during all of this and just kind of chatted about it. Maybe some people could have said sorry, and they might have fixed it, and we'd have a very different history if this would have happened. But no such meeting took place after the renewal of the triumvirate back in the mid-50s. As far as I know, there's no meeting. So these things just add up. They aren't talking. And so each of them are starting to perceive that the other is against the other. And then there are attempts to negotiate. So by the time, this is kind of late in 52 BC. So by the time we get towards the end of 52 BC, there is so much violence in the city of Rome and so much tension in the city of Rome. If you remember, again, I don't know if you remember these people, but Milo is one of Pompey's clients, who kind of has a private army, had been tribune of the plebs, and had kind of a group of thugs, including Pompey's veterans. And then you also had Clodius. Again, I don't know if you remember him, this guy that invaded the Bonadeiarites, who had adopted himself from a patrician family, his patrician heritage, and had adopted himself into a plebeian family so that he could run for tribune of the plebs. And Clodius, if you remember, had re-legalized the collegia. These are those groups of like working men in Rome, and they all now owed Clodius their allegiance, and they formed kind of a gang for Clodius. So these two guys have these big street gangs in the city of Rome. They are still fighting by the time we get to late 52 BC. And the violence is so bad that Clodius ends up being killed. And Milo is running to be consul, and it's in the run-up to that election that a scuffle happens where Clodius is killed in late 52 BC. And the emergency is so bad that Pompey is given the consulship alone. The Senate just decide kind of unilaterally that Pompey is going to be the only candidate that's allowed to run for the consulship. He's not going to have a colleague. They don't want to make him a dictator, but because again, they have an odd relationship with Pompey. He's a useful person to them. He's popular, but they hate Caesar more than Pompey at the moment, and so they're willing to use Pompey, even though if Caesar weren't there, they would turn on Pompey in an instant. And we saw that right when Pompey came back after these amazing conquests, when he blitzed through the eastern half of the Mediterranean, and he lays down his army, and the Senate are like, no, you can't have anything that you want because you laid down your army, so we're not going to do anything you want. So they don't like Pompey, but they're willing to use Pompey against Caesar. And so they even will give Pompey the sole consulship for the year 51 BC. So this is 52 BC, so for the year 51 BC, that's going to happen. And again, they're afraid. The reason, why are they so afraid? In addition to just the violence, in this conflict between Milo and Clodius, where Clodius dies, so there is a funeral for Clodius, and as you might guess, right, Clodius is very popular among a lot of these kind of thuggish guys in the city of Rome. And as a pyre, you don't want to give a bunch of angry, violent people an opportunity to light fires. And so they go to burn Clodius's body, and they're like, well, we might as well just start burning buildings because we're really upset about that our guy was killed. And one of the buildings that burns down is the Senate house, okay? So they burned down the building where the Senate are meeting. And again, maybe that was on purpose, but if you're a senator, you're feeling pretty threatened. You're in late 52 BC, you are scared. And so again, you're going to go to Pompey. Pompey is a guy who you think can restore order. He's done this many times. You don't like him, but he's better than the alternative. And so Pompey is given the sole consulship by senatorial decree, by the ultimate decree of the Senate, Senatus Consultum Ultimum. They pass one of those, abolishing what this would do is it would immunize Pompey from any prosecution for abrogating the Constitution and becoming sole consul. So what that does is they give him backing to kind of be the sole consul. So this leads to Pompey now basically working on behalf of the Senate and many of the conservative members of the Senate, which he does. So his buddy Milo, who had been his friend and had been his ally, is exiled. So Pompey has Milo exiled. His former client has him exiled. He passes a law requiring 5 years between the end of when one. Okay, let me phrase this differently. If a person becomes consul, normally they got a province the year after that. Like they became governor of some province. They went from consulship right to proconsulship and took on a governorship. That's what Caesar just did. He was consul in whatever it was 60 BC, I can't remember, and then he goes to Gaul right after, and that keeps him from being prosecuted. So Pompey passes a law as consul that requires a 5-year gap. So when you become consul, you're then open to prosecution for 5 years, and then you take your governorship. And again, this is all aimed at Julius Caesar. This is all so that Caesar can eventually be held liable. So even if he runs for the consulship, he can't go to another province immediately and get more immunity. So that's the whole point of that. And then Pompey is given another 5 years in Spain. I don't know how that works with this law. In theory, you should have had to wait 5 years, but I don't know. Either the timing of it is such that he gets his proconsulship. Maybe it counts for the next year kind of thing. We're not going to count it now. I'm not sure why that works. So people are clearly worried at this point that there is going to be some kind of conflict, that civil war might be inevitable. And so Julius Caesar decides that he is going to be prosecuted. He's worried about that. So he wants another consulship. He is going to want to run in absentia the next year for a consul when his governorship of Gaul, when his second 5 years in Gaul is over. And it is, by the way, not entirely clear when that needs to be, because the triumvirate was renewed in 55 BC, so that should be 5 more years from 55 BC, maybe. But also, I think Caesar's term in Gaul technically ended in 54 BC. So which of these dates do we count the second 5 years in Gaul from? Like, do we count it from 55 BC or do we count it from 54 BC? And I'm not sure that they had figured that out. And so it was kind of unclear if Caesar would have a 1 year gap where he was open to prosecution. So when does his governorship end? That's not very clear. His opponents were claiming, that it was, I said 54, I meant 56. His opponents were claiming that it was 56, because that would then open him up for prosecution a year before he ran for consul. Caesar's obviously claiming 55. But so that creates some uncertainty in the Senate. You get the 2 legions each. That happens in 53 BC. I already talked about that. That's when Caesar was very upset about that. And then in 50 BC, which is this year that Pompey is going to be sole consul, Caesar wants to stand for election in absentia for the next year. So he gets his tribunes to propose that, which they are able to successfully get through. And that's what's going to happen, according to Julius Caesar. Now, we know from Julius Caesar's civil wars, this is Caesar himself writing, that he sent a letter to the Senate around this time, 50 BC. He sends a letter, and we have from his account, what the letter said. Now, this is Julius Caesar talking about himself. So maybe he changed it, maybe he edited it, I don't know. But this supposedly is what he said to the Senate in 50 BC. It reads like Pompey's letter in some ways to the Senate a decade and some earlier. Only consider that by a small expenditure of your effort, you can put an end to grave dissensions and release all Italy from fear. Right? This is referencing the fact that everybody is really scared that there's going to be a civil war, that it feels inevitable. Prestige has always been of prime importance to me, even outweighing life itself. I think that's such a telling statement. Julius Caesar cares about his status. He wants to be the best. He wants to be the top. He wants to be preeminent in Rome. And Pompey is kind of in his way. And people in the Senate are constantly going after him and demeaning him and finding ways to damage his dignity. And this is Caesar saying, right, this is another way that he's had his dignity wrestled away from him, which is the Roman people voted him the right to run in absentia, and they had voted him a command in Gaul for 5 years. And there are people in the Senate that are saying, hey, your command's already over. It started in 56 BC. It didn't start in 55 BC. So we're demanding that you come back to Rome and answer for your crimes over the last few years. And so that's what he's referencing here, saying being drugged back to Rome. Although the will of the people had been that I should be admitted as a candidate in absentia in the next election. So he's saying, look, I've done everything by the book. The tribunes of the plebs have put these laws through, and the people that are trying to go after me are doing so illegally. They're violating the Constitution. And he just says, well, look, I'm willing to play along, and I even suggested a reasonable compromise, that he and Pompey both disband. So this is Caesar's proposal to the Senate. Caesar will disband his legions, which are up in Gaul, and Pompey will disband his legions, which are in Italy and in Spain. And if everybody agrees to that, then nobody needs to be worried about a civil war because nobody has armies. So that's the argument that Julius Caesar is making. And he's saying, look, even though I'm advocating for peace and a general disarmament, there are soldiers being raised up in Italy, including my 2 legions, which were taken from me. My own legions, which I gave. Look at this from Caesar's perspective. He gives legions to the Roman Republic so that they can use them in Syria, and those same legions are going to now be used against him. So from Caesar's perspective, and this would play well with his soldiers. Imagine him giving a speech to us, which he did, and you saw this in Julius Caesar's reading, gives a speech to his soldiers. And he lists some of these things. Like, as far as he's concerned, his rights are being violated. And you can see his argument. You can see his argument there. The Senate do initially agree that this is a good idea, but then Pompey is not held to this same standard. So they say, yeah, we'll have everybody disband, but not really. Pompey and these soldiers in Italy do not have to disband. So it's not really what Caesar wanted. So in the end, this is not going to fly. We're told in a letter from Cicero. So in addition to having some of the letters and comments of Julius Caesar, we also have many letters of Cicero from this time, which, again, Cicero's in the middle of all of this. It's a really good source for kind of the inner workings of what's good. Cicero did not intend all of these. Some of these letters he did intend to be published, and so they have a certain spin, but not all of them. And so we get, because some of them make Cicero look pretty bad, like he just looks kind of petty, and he looks kind of like a coward in some of them. Clearly did not want them to be some of this to be published. You get a sense of what at least Cicero and probably other senators thought of Caesar's proposal. The long and short of it, Cicero says, is that Caesar himself, once our friend, has sent the Senate a menacing and offensive dispatch. They find what Caesar's saying ludicrous. Again, it seems like anything that Caesar says to a group of people in the Senate is just read as brash and offensive and unconstitutional and problematic. Caesar would make the argument that he's actually proposing some very reasonable reforms. But again, you can be the judge. And is so insolent as to retain his army and province in spite of the Senate. The Senate had voted for a disarmament. They had said there needs to be a disarmament. And Julius Caesar wasn't going to disarm because Pompey wasn't really being held to disarm as well. So, and then he talks about some senatorial politics, and he talks about the types of people who were eager to see Caesar take charge. Never has the state been in greater danger. Never have disloyal citizens had a better prepared leader. Preparations are being pushed on with very great activity on our side. Again, these are just little things that you might pick up. Cicero is kind of acknowledging that there's already sides, right? There are clearly sides. And he's on Pompey's side and the Senate side. And then there's Caesar on... Like, you don't talk like this if a war is not imminent, right? This is us-them type thinking. This is being done by the influence and energy of our friend Pompey. Italy has been marked out into districts, showing for which part each of us is to be responsible. I've taken Capua. So Caesar's right. There is like a defense of Italy that's being planned. And Caesar's soldiers are being used in Italy to defend against Caesar potentially coming in. So Caesar talks about how there had been a motion to make him an enemy of the state and to see that the republic came to no harm, that this motion had been put forward. His tribunes veto the motion, and the Senate just ignores it. And he talks about in this writing a couple of times about how this historic power for the tribunes was not even taken away fully by Sulla. That despite the fact that Sulla did so much to the tribunes, and he even altered their veto, he still allowed them to object in some way. And the Senate ignore this. They do not adhere to this kind of most sacred Republican tradition of the tribunes being able to veto. And so there's some drama there, which is that these tribunes that had been loyal to Caesar decide to run out of the city. Look, we're not safe. Our tribunes, our vetoes have been ignored. We're going to run out of the city and get out of here. And then, maybe that's dramatic, but the point, Caesar really says to his soldiers, we're fighting for the Constitution here. The tribunes have... in fact, you know what? I'll tell you what. I will take the Senate overstepped its authority, because you could make the argument that by overriding the tribunician veto, they're overstepping those. So I will take C and B, or C and D. I will take both those. I will make a note to myself to take both C and D. Hold on just a second. You won't give me a second to rush this down. So that's his argument. He's really making a constitutional argument here. So that gets us, right, to Julius Caesar now in late 50 BC, feeling like he now is kind of up against a wall, right? The Senate passed this ultimate decree. Julius Caesar is formally ordered now to disband his army. The vetoes have been ignored. He's going to be prosecuted. It's just a matter of time. Caesar is on the north side of the Rubicon River, which is not much. It's like the Jordan out here, right? It's kind of a creek, but it represents the boundary of his province, of his province. And so when he crosses over with arms, he is committing an illegal action, and that's what he does. This is him standing on the edge of the Rubicon River, right, contemplating what it is that he's going to do. We're told by Suetonius, the biographer, that he gathers up his soldiers there, the boundary of his province. He considers what he needs to do. He says, even now we can still turn back, but once we've crossed the little bridge across the Rubicon, at that point it's a question of war. And then Caesar said, let us go where the gods have shown us the way, and the injustice of our enemies calls us. And then we get this very famous phrase, which we still use to this day, to talk about something that cannot be undone. The die is cast, or also crossing the Rubicon. You hear that same thing. Thus and such politician crossed the Rubicon. I get a lot of talk about like the filibuster, right? There has been Rubicon language with that. that if the filibuster were to be abolished, Kristen Sinema from Arizona was a crucial advocate for keeping the filibuster, and that was kind of one of her arguments, was that this would be a Rubicon. You would not have a way for an opposition party in the Senate to really gum things up and prevent a kind of one-party state. And she, even kind of against her own party, she had since become independent, but had said, we need to keep the filibuster. This would be a Rubicon moment. And so Julius Caesar invents the Rubicon moment. He crosses the Rubicon, and at this point, it's war. At this point, everything has to be decided by arms. He does this, we don't know the exact date, in January of 49 BC, probably early on in January. Now, the question is, why did Julius Caesar march? Why does he do this? And again, I think Suetonius gives us a pretty good answer. I don't think you had this in your reading, so I really want you to see this, because it tells us, I think, accurately what Caesar must have been thinking. Pompey used to say that because with the resources of a private citizen, Caesar could not complete the enterprise he had begun, and could not satisfy the expectations he had aroused among the people regarding his return to Rome. So Pompey's argument was that Caesar was not, without a war, would not have been able to actually become a leading man in Rome. Others say, and I think this is really a better argument, that he was afraid of being forced to give an account of the actions he had undertaken in contravention of the auspices, laws, and tribunician vetoes during his first consulship. See, yes, Julius Caesar, Mr. My tribune's vetoes are being ignored, had done this when he was consul. The tribunes had interposed their vetoes at times against his legislation, and he had ignored that. The sitting consul, who was opposite him, Bibulus, had declared, now it doesn't matter if he was doing it disingenuously, but as a consul, Bibulus had the right to say, look, the gods aren't happy with what we're doing. We cannot meet. And Julius Caesar met anyway. So, again, the guy does not exactly have a principled leg to stand on. And so that's what Suetonius points out, is that Julius Caesar, they had every right to prosecute him. He had violated religious law and civil law and constitutional law. For Marcus Cato repeatedly declared, even swearing it on an oath, that he would impeach Caesar as soon as he had disbanded his army. Now, of course, again, is Cato right to do this? Yes, Cato has a claim, right? Conservative Cato has a legitimate claim to say that Caesar is a threat to the Constitution, 100%. But at the same time, he is pushing Caesar into a corner. Again, I'm not saying Caesar's right. I'm not saying Cato's right. Well, I am. I think Cato is right. But you just, the effects are obvious. It's obvious what is going to happen if Cato's making it very widely known that he's going to prosecute Caesar if he disbands his army. Right? Then Caesar's like, well, I'm not going to disband my army then. Of course. Why would I? You're going to prosecute me. So it makes sense. And it was commonly predicted that if he returned as a private citizen, he would answer the charges surrounded by armed men. In other words, Caesar was not going to get a fair trial. Again, I think he would be convicted in a fair trial. But with all the bribery, I don't know what a fair trial is in Rome anyway. But the point is that Caesar was going down. If he did not cross the Rubicon, he was going down. Not saying that justifies him, but it does explains what he did. There are some who come to think that he had come to love the habit of command, that having weighed up the relative strengths of his own and his opponent's resources, such as pure calculation, he grasped the opportunity to seize power which he had coveted from his early youth. In other words, he also just made a utilitarian argument here. I see what Pompey's got and Senate have got. I see what I've got. I've just been in Gaul for 5 years. I've just invaded Great Britain. I'm awesome. He believes his own hype. If Suetonius is reporting correctly about the gods, like Caesar thinks the gods are on his side, that's a dangerous combination. Power, army, gods on your side. Why not? Why not take a risk? Why not cast the dice and see if it works out? All of these things can explain Julius Caesar. They're not mutually exclusive either. They could all be at work in Caesar's mind. And I think, Suetonius probably has the right of it. I think this is a sort of reasonable expectation of why Caesar did what he did.
Hey, did you get something out of that video, or maybe learn something about Roman history that you didn't know before? Would you just click that like button? It's the best thing you can do to help the channel. The videos keep playing, and if you click the like button, it tells YouTube that you want more videos like this one. Maybe you have a question about what we talked about, or you know something, or have a comment that you want to share. Would you please type that into the comment box? I read those comments, and that means I answer questions, or I listen to feedback, but also a lot of other people read those comments. And so if you want to add something to the discussion for other people, if you do that in the comments, that will help the video as well, and just it'll keep the discussion going. Finally, if you want to get these videos when they come out and not just hope that YouTube is going to tell you, you can subscribe to the channel. Click the subscribe button and you'll get the videos as soon as I put them out. They'll come up to the front of your YouTube homepage, and wouldn't that be great? The last thing that I'll mention is my podcast, the Pax Romana podcast. I update that podcast every week. We do a couple of different things. One is we go through the story of the Roman Empire from the death of Julius Caesar on a week-by-week basis, all the way through as far as you guys are interested in going. I think right now we're in the 3rd century AD. So you can listen to those as they go, almost like an audiobook. It's free. Or if you want to just dip into particular episodes, that's fine. The other thing I do from time to time on that podcast is I answer listener questions with kind of a longer treatment about some particular topic, theme, or area that listeners are interested in. So with that, thanks for watching the video, and take care.